Happy Thanksgiving. Just want to say I'm thankful. I moved out of the communist state of New Jersey where their churches are shut down and moved to Florida where we have a rock star governor, and I was allowed to go to mass this morning and start my day off right. So that's one of the many things I'm thankful for today. So on every Thanksgiving, I always tell this Thanksgiving story. You may have heard it, but most people, when I tell the story, tell me they never heard that in school. They were never taught that in school. And the way I learn is I always go to the source. So the way I came back to the Catholic Church is when I was learning church history, I didn't go to people writing about church history. I went to the people that were there, St. Ignatius of Antioch and all the church fathers, to see what the early church actually believed. And when I want to learn about American history, I go to the people that were there. So for this Thanksgiving story, and again, I've told it a lot of times, you may have heard me tell it, but I like to retell it so people remember it. And if you've never heard it before, please listen and retell it to your children and your grandchildren. Share it on social media, and we'll get the truth out about what a great country this is. So I do the same thing with Veterans Day. If you see my Veterans Day video, I always retell the story of Fort McHenry, another inspiring story that people don't learn in school. Today, it's going to be a little twist, because with everything going on in the world, I add a little twist at the end. But getting right to the story, I got it right out of the biography of the first governor of the Pilgrims in Plymouth, William Bradford, in his own words, okay? Not what some socialist professor taught me or some liberal school teacher taught me. What the man that was there said. And so a lot of you learned that, you know, the Pilgrims came over because they were getting persecuted by King James, and they were, you know, fleeing persecution. Well, what William Bradford said was a group of about 40 of these separatist Christians, and what that was, they were Protestants that did not believe the Church of England's doctrines, not all of their doctrines. But if you didn't agree with the Church of England's doctrines, you would be persecuted. King James, the same guy who authorized the King James Bible, would have you killed or thrown into jail if you worship the Lord differently than the Church of England told you. So these 40 pilgrims fled to Holland, where there was freedom of religion, and they worshiped there, free to worship the Lord, for about 10 years. And William Bradford said the parents were getting worried because there was so much secularism. Even though they had the freedom of religion, there was so much there, they were afraid their children would be seduced and tempted. And they heard about this new world with an open wilderness. And so they set out, and they were trying to get to Manhattan Island. And I guess the winds blew, and they ended up in New England. But they believed that God sent them there, and God's providence landed them in Plymouth. And they sent out 2 scouts in a little boat, little dinghy, and they reported that this wave literally lifted them up, and when they landed ashore, they landed, according to God's providence, on an old Indian camp. And everything was there, fresh water, everything needed. There was even corn stored up that they could eat. And they thought it was miraculous, and they thanked God. And so what's interesting is William Bradford said they made a compact, the Mayflower Compact. You can read about that. But one of the things that he thought would help was that everybody shared, that nobody owned nothing. It all belonged to the Pilgrims, the whole land. They would work it and share, and everybody would get equal. Everything would be equal. No one would own more than anybody. It would all be equal. Because, you know, the Bible says in Acts, you know, the Christians gave all they had and they shared with one another. Okay? So basically it was socialism, the first experience of socialism that we know. They didn't call it socialism, but it was basically what socialists want. And that first winter, half of them starved to death. And William Bradford wrote, said it was a terrible idea because people were lazy. They're like, well, let that guy work. The young people that could work more was like, why am I working to provide for this guy and his wife and kids, and I don't even have any kids? So the young people refused to work. And then people got lazy. They thought everybody else would do it. And it was a failed experiment. It proved socialism fails. And these were Christian men and women, and it didn't work. These people wanted this to work, and it didn't work because socialism never works. So William Bradford said he had a new idea, and the elders and all agreed. They'll give each man a plot of land, and he'll own it. He'll have his own property. That's his right to have his property. That's his, nobody can do anything, and he can work that land any way he wants and prosper from it. It was so successful that not only did they have enough to feed their families, but they had enough to share. And then when people from the old world heard about how prosperous this colony was, more and more people came up. And then America became the most prosperous nation in the world based on capitalism. Based on capitalism. Before America, most people lived in poverty. They were either serfs or slaves. You had your rich land barons, which would be like the tech billionaires today, equivalent in money. And but 90% of the people were poor. They didn't own property. Nobody had property rights, again, except for the rich land barons. Nobody had property. Nobody had money. Most people were illiterate. Capitalism in America changed all that and brought everybody up into prosperity. And the whole world seen it and were envious. And they came, and people just came in droves for this freedom. Because freedom is what get freedom and capitalism, free enterprise, freedom of religion, people free to express themselves. We just exploded. But you still had people that were stubborn and thought socialism was better. America just didn't do it right. So in every country, while America's growing and prospering, all these different countries all over the world were trying socialism and failed one after another. And then they thought, well, maybe they need a little more government control. So they took socialism to a little further to the left and called it communism. And then everywhere communism it failed. And America just kept prospering. But you still have these liberal professors brainwashing, indoctrinating our kids out of high school that socialism done right will work. We just never done it right. We just got to figure out how to do it right. Marxism, communism will work if it's done right. And so everywhere in the world, they try and do it right, and everywhere in the world, it fails. And then just the last 4 years, you've seen Trump really give us the purest form of capitalism we had in years, getting rid of all these burdensome regulations and all these burdensome taxes. And America had the best economy in 50 years until the Chinese sent the COVID over here. But the story of the first Thanksgiving is socialism fails. We proved it right off the bat. And capitalism works. Now, I didn't forget our Native American brothers and sisters. They did help us. But it was capitalism that catapulted us to the most prosperous nation ever known to man. But what's interesting, the Pilgrims were devout Christians. They were devout Protestant Christians. But God sent them a Catholic Christian to help them. That Catholic Christian happened to be a Native American named Squanto, who was taken as a prisoner 10 years before the Pilgrims arrived by some English settlers. He was in prison, he suffered, and then some Catholic monks seen him being sold. So they bought him to free him. And now Protestants back in the day weren't big on missionary and evangelism because they really believed everything was predestined, they believed in Calvinism. But Catholics still believe the teachings of Jesus. Go out and, tell the whole world about the gospel. So the Catholic monks converted Squanto into a Catholic Christian. And then Squanto went back to share his new faith with his tribe and found out his tribe had died to smallpox or something. There was some kind of disease. His whole tribe was dead. But the Pilgrims were there. And the Pilgrims didn't know what to plant in America. The seeds they brought from Holland didn't grow. So he taught them what seeds. He taught them how to hunt, how to fish, how to trap beaver. Taught them a lot of things they weren't familiar with. And then he also got them into a peace agreement with all the other local tribes because unlike what you might have heard from your liberal school teacher or your Marxist professor, This wasn't a peaceful utopia that America just came and took over. These tribes were warring constantly. They were taking each other as slaves. They were taking each other's lands. They were fighting constantly. So the Pilgrims were in danger. But Squanto, a Catholic Christian sent by God, in the words of William Bradford, all the Pilgrims believed Squanto was sent by God. He made a peace deal for him. And that's the wonderful story of Thanksgiving that many of us never learned in school. And what I like to do, and I advise you, always go to the source. Find someone who was there and see what they had to say. Now we know capitalism works, socialism fails, and then I read about this Great Reset. And my friends are telling me about the Great Reset. And to me, it just sounds like a whacked out conspiracy theory. So I'm like, let me Google this. And it's actually a real thing. Last year, the World Economic Forum came up with this idea we need to have a Great Reset to come out of COVID. And their director, Klaus Schwab, is stating publicly, they're not even hiding it, that we need a universal income, that everybody needs to be equal. We need to equal the playing field for the whole world. So basically he's saying socialism worldwide now with these rich guys running it. And of course they're going to have property, but they don't think we need property. None of us will own property, but they'll own property, of course, just like the rich land barons that had serfs. And what was interesting is I actually seen a Zoom call, because then they had another meeting. And on the Zoom call, of course, you had all these socialist European leaders, Prince Charles, you had, of course, the communist leaders, and then you had American Democrat leaders that are friends with Joe Biden, that are probably going to be in his cabinet. But what was very interesting to me was what this Chinese communist said on the Zoom meeting. He said, the Great Reset will help us build back better. That was Joe Biden's campaign. I know he really didn't campaign, so most people don't even know his campaign slogan. He just knew the election was rigged and he was going to win, so he never left his basement. But that was his official slogan, build back better. I was like, wow. So this Great Reset, they're going to try and impose socialism on the whole world. They're basically saying that we need a universal income and we need equity throughout the world to make it a level playing field. And the communist Chinese are loving it because that's the communist Chinese form of government. Yeah, there's a lot of billionaires in China, but most of the people are like serfs. And there's going to be a lot of billionaires here. That's why Michael Bloomberg donated $100 million to defeat Trump in Florida alone, and he still lost. And George Soros donated tens of millions of dollars to help Biden win. Well, because all these billionaires know they're going to stay rich, but we'll be under control. And Bloomberg just happens to have billions of dollars in investments in China. I mean, just follow the money and you'll smell the stink. And what's really interesting is we know socialism fails. So why are these people trying to tell us it'll work? Or we can make it better, we can make it better. Because that's not their motive. I think Archbishop Vigano said it best, and I'm going to paraphrase him, but he said their motive is to enslave us. And he said their inspiration is the one who was the murderer from the beginning. Socialism, communism, Marxism is devised by Satan himself. Maybe the people don't think so. Maybe they, I'm sure there's some people that actually think it might be a good thing to help people. And some may even be Catholics. And they may think that this is good, it'll help the poor to bring them up. But whenever you level the playing field, it never brings people up. Capitalism raises all boats. When the tide raises in America, everybody's boats raise. That's why under Trump, African-American unemployment was the lowest in history. African-American poverty was the lowest in history. African-American home ownership was the highest. African-American business ownership was the highest because he raised the tide for everyone, so all boats rise. But when you try and level that tide, it always makes us equally poor. We all become poor. So let's take a lesson from the first Thanksgiving and resist the socialist agenda that these globalists are going to try and impose on us. God bless. Happy Thanksgiving. And remember, no matter what happens, we still live in the greatest country in the world, and we still belong to the church that Christ established. If you're Catholic, stay Catholic.